a paralyzed girl, a forgotten war dog, and a blizzard that nearly ended it all. But this isn't a story about endings. It's about what happens when love finds you in the cold. There are stories that begin with a bang explosions, shouts, sirens. But some begin in silence, buried under snow and forgotten names. This is one of those stories. A paralyzed girl, a broken dog, and a night so cold even the stars stayed hidden. But in the heart of that storm, something unthinkable happened. Two abandoned souls found each other, and what followed changed not just their lives, but the lives of everyone around them. This is more than a rescue story. It's a lesson, a reminder. As the old saying goes, not all heroes wear badges. Some have 4 legs and silent eyes. Watch to the end. You won't forget it. The snow had not stopped for hours. It fell like a silent punishment from the sky, relentless, cold, blinding. Somewhere in the highlands of northern Arizona, a yellow school bus lay overturned in a ditch off a winding mountain road, its windows shattered, tires spinning in the wind like lifeless limbs. The rescue crews had already come and gone. Flashing lights had painted the snow red and blue. Voices had shouted names, and one by one, the children had been pulled from the wreckage frightened, bruised, but alive. Except for one. 12-year-old Josie Hart remained behind, curled between 2 bent seats near the rear emergency exit, too quiet to be noticed, too small to make noise. The others had walked, limped, or been carried out. Josie couldn't do any of those things. Her legs hadn't worked since she was 9. A rare degenerative condition had stolen the use of her lower body, and tonight it would nearly steal her life. She had called out at first, whispered really because her voice didn't carry far anymore. Not after weeks of silence in a house where silence was the safest thing. But no one heard. No one came. Eventually, the voices faded. The flashing lights disappeared. Only the wind remained, howling through broken glass, tugging at her sleeves. Hours passed. Her fingers grew numb, her cheeks cracked under frozen tears. The blanket she always carried in her backpack had been left at home that day. Her aunt said she was too old to need baby things. So Josie wrapped her arms around her chest and tried to pretend she wasn't shivering. She knew what hypothermia felt like. She had read about it. Numbness, confusion, sleepiness. It was tempting to let go. But then something inside her whispered, "You are not done yet." With great effort, Josie turned herself over and used her arms to drag her body toward the rear exit. The bus groaned, old metal, bending under her weight. Glass cracked beneath her palms. But she didn't stop. Inch by inch, she pulled herself through the gap, down the broken steps, and into the snow. It felt like crawling into another world. The cold stabbed at her like knives, and her breath came in painful clouds. Trees loomed all around her, dark and crooked, their branches scratching the sky. The road was nowhere in sight. She had no phone, no flashlight, nothing but her backpack, now torn open at one seam, dragging behind her like a wounded limb. Still, she crawled. She didn't know how long she moved, before she collapsed in a pocket of snow beneath a leaning pine. Her muscles burned, her elbows bled, her wrists throbbed, but she had made it out. At least, she thought she had. She didn't remember falling asleep, but the next thing she knew, the world had gone quiet. Not just quiet, empty. That was when she heard it. A rustle, a low crunch of snow. Her heart stopped. Coyotes? A mountain lion? She didn't have the strength to scream. The sound came closer. Then she saw two golden eyes in the darkness. They blinked slowly, hovering just above the ground, reflecting moonlight through the trees. Josie held her breath. The figure stepped forward, limping. It wasn't a coyote. It wasn't a wolf. It was a dog. A German shepherd. He looked terrible, ribs visible through a filthy coat, fur matted and bloody at the shoulder. One of his ears was torn, the other half frozen. He moved with the caution of something that had been hurt many times and never once helped. Josie didn't move. The dog didn't either. Then, slowly, he crept closer. She reached out, hand trembling so hard she wasn't sure she'd be able to touch him even if he let her. But he moved first. He lowered himself onto his belly and crawled toward her, dragging one leg behind like it no longer worked. His eyes never left hers. He stopped just short of her outstretched fingers and then gently pressed his nose into her palm. It was cold and wet and achingly real. Josie's breath hitched. She didn't even know she had tears left, but somehow they came again. You're not gonna leave me, are you?" she whispered. The dog didn't flinch. He only gave a soft, rasping whine and nudged her wrist. Then, without hesitation, he curled his battered body against hers carefully, tenderly as if trying to warm her. She felt the weight of him along her side, the heat of his chest against her ribs. It didn't fix the cold, but it blunted it. It didn't erase the pain, but it reminded her she wasn't alone in it. She laid a hand on his tangled fur. No collar, no tag, no sound. "You don't have a name either, huh?" she whispered. "We're just forgotten things, you and me." The dog rested his head near her neck, letting out a shaky breath that matched her own. Josie shivered once more, then closed her eyes and whispered, "I think we're both forgotten." She opened her eyes again and looked at him. "I'll call you Nameless," she said softly. "That way, you're not nothing. You're something I can remember." The dog didn't move, but somehow, she knew he'd heard. The sun didn't rise that morning so much as it simply glowed weakly through the gray sky, filtering between branches dusted in white. Everything was hushed, blanketed by snow that kept the forest silent and still. It was a kind of stillness that felt almost sacred, if not for the trail of drag marks slicing through the powder. Ben Coulter noticed them first while checking the tree line near his property. He wasn't looking for anything in particular. He rarely was these days. The 65-year-old had long since retired from the rhythm of expectation. His cabin, nestled deep in the northern Arizona pines, hadn't seen a visitor in almost 2 years. That was how he preferred it. Just him, the trees, and silence that didn't ask questions. But this morning, something pulled him off the trail. At first, he thought it was the tracks of a wounded animal. There were paw prints, but they were strange, interspersed, with uneven scuffs, like something being dragged. Then he spotted something else. Cloth, torn denim, small smears of blood barely visible against the white. He squinted, breath clouding as he moved closer. There beneath the drooping limbs of a snow-heavy pine lay a figure, a child. Ben's chest tightened. She was barely more than a bundle of wet clothes and matted hair, curled around a large German shepherd whose body pressed protectively against hers. The dog lifted its head at Ben's approach, eyes sharp and golden, ears pinned. It didn't growl, but it didn't move either. Ben stopped a few feet away. "Hey," he said gently, voice hoarse from disuse. "You all right?" The girl stirred, eyes fluttering open. Her lips were pale, her skin raw from wind and cold. "He stayed with me," she croaked, "when no one else did." Ben's gaze flicked to the dog. There was dried blood on its muzzle, a deep wound on the front shoulder. Its ribs jutted out beneath tangled fur, and yet it hadn't left her. "Can you move?" he asked. She shook her head. Ben hesitated only a moment more before pulling off his thick flannel and wrapping it around her. Then he knelt and, with slow precision, scooped her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, too light. The dog didn't move at first, but as Ben turned, it followed, limping badly but determined. They made it back to the cabin 20 minutes later. The wood stove had already begun warming the space. It wasn't fancy, just a single-room structure with a loft and a cast-iron fireplace. Ben laid the girl on the old couch and covered her in every blanket he could find. He didn't ask her name. Not yet. That could come later. The dog sat beside her, unmoving, watching Ben with unblinking eyes. Ben moved into the small kitchen, pulling out a can of broth from the shelf and setting it to warm. He glanced back toward the couch. The girl was awake, lips twitching from the heat returning to her limbs. She reached for the dog's ear and whispered something he couldn't hear. "Who are you?" he murmured. Not at her, but at the animal who hadn't left her side. When he returned with the cup of warm broth, the girl took it with both hands. Her fingers shook, but she drank without complaint. "What's your name?" he asked finally. "Josie," she whispered. "Josie Hart." He nodded. I'm Ben. She looked down at the dog. His name's nameless. I just made it up. Ben stared at the shepherd. That blood on his mouth. Did he hurt someone? Josie's eyes widened. Panicked. Number. It's not mine. I think he was hurt before. But he didn't hurt me. He just stayed. Ben took a long breath and exhaled slowly. He believed her. That night, the storm raged again. The wind clawed at the windows and howled across the roof. But inside the cabin, it was warm. Josie slept deeply under layers of wool. Her small body curled toward the fire. The dog didn't move far. He lay at the door of the room just outside the small space Ben had curtained off to give her privacy. His nose pointed toward the crack at the bottom. He didn't bark, he didn't whine, but he didn't sleep either. Ben watched him for a long time. It had been 10 years since the fire. 10 years since the day his house burned down in Phoenix, and with it, his only child Lila, barely 16. He had been working a double shift at the station when the call came in. By the time he reached the address, it was too late. The fire had swallowed everything. After that, Ben left. The city, the job, the people who said it wasn't his fault. He'd come here, to this cabin, and stayed, away from the noise, away from grief. But tonight, as he sat by the fire watching the girl sleep and the dog keep vigil, something stirred in him. Not guilt, not yet peace, but something quieter. Something like breath returning after being held too long. The dog turned its head and looked at Ben. Not as a threat, not even as a challenge, just recognition. As if saying, I see what you lost. Me too. Ben nodded once. All right, nameless, he whispered. You can stay. Both of you. Morning came slow and silver, draping over the trees like a blanket someone had forgotten to fold. Inside the cabin, the fire still smoldered from the night before. Josie slept deeply, curled into the thick quilt that had once belonged to Ben's daughter. Her breathing was steady now, her color slowly returning. But it was the dog Nameless who never moved, still stretched out at the door, standing silent guard like a soldier who had forgotten how to rest. Ben crouched nearby, a steaming mug of coffee in one hand, his eyes locked on the dog. There was something about the way the animal sat always alert, never quite relaxed. He didn't flinch, didn't startle, but there was a tension beneath the surface, like he was holding himself together out of duty, not comfort. The dried blood on his fur had hardened into dark clumps. The wound on his shoulder looked deep, too deep for Ben's basic first aid kit. He picked up the landline and dialed a number he hadn't called in a long time. Camilla Park answered on the third ring. This better be real, Ben, she said in her usual no-nonsense tone. You don't call unless someone's bleeding. He's bleeding, Ben said. And it's not someone. It's a dog. There was a pause. Give me 20 minutes. Camilla arrived in 16. Her truck rolled through the icy drive like it knew the way. She stepped out dressed in her usual black coat, her short salt and pepper hair tied into a stubby ponytail, and a medical bag slung over one shoulder. At 50-something, Camilla Park was lean, sharp-eyed, and known for saving more four-legged lives than most vets did in their entire careers. She wasn't warm, exactly, but she had a way of cutting through silence like a scalpel clean and precise. Inside the cabin, she didn't waste time. Where's the patient? She asked. Ben gestured to the doorway. The dog didn't move. He didn't growl. He simply looked up at Camilla, eyes tired, as if sizing her up. He hasn't left her side, Ben muttered, nodding toward the sleeping Josie. Camilla knelt slowly and pulled on a pair of gloves. Smart boy, she murmured. But you're hurting. I can see it in your shoulder. She spoke to him like he understood every word. Maybe he did. She ran gentle fingers through his fur, parting the matted strands around the wound. Bite wound. Maybe fencing wire. Could be both. She cleaned around it with saline, wiped away the grime, and winced at the crusted lacerations along his back legs. He's been through hell, she said flatly. Will he make it? Ben asked. If he wants to, Camilla replied. But this isn't just physical. She tilted his head carefully, inspecting his face, ears, and muzzle. "See this?" she said, pointing just behind his left ear. "That's not a scar. That's ink." Ben leaned in. Under the fur, barely visible, was a faded tattoo. A string of numbers, letters, military style, the kind they used on service dogs. Camila's voice dropped. This boy was a K-9, a real one, probably military or high-level police. Ben's stomach turned. Camila pulled out her phone and began typing. "I've got a friend at the Regional Working Dog Registry. She can trace this." Ben stepped back, almost in a daze. The fire cracked behind them. When Camila stood again, her expression had changed. Softer, almost sad. "The numbers registered to a German shepherd named Ranger," she said. "He served with the 112th Medical Support Unit. Handler listed, Sergeant Declan Morse." Ben froze. "I knew Declan," he said, voice brittle. "He was my best friend." Camila nodded slowly. "Then I think this dog belonged to both of you." Ben turned away, swallowing the weight in his throat. Memories he'd sealed in boxes behind his ribs came rushing out, boxes he hadn't dared open in a decade. Declan, the fire, the day everything ended. After Declan passed lung cancer from too many years around Battlefield Burn, Pittsben had inherited Ranger. It was in the will. Simple, direct. "You need someone to watch your back, and so does he," Declan had written. But Ben couldn't. He couldn't look at Ranger without seeing the things they'd both lost. So he gave the dog to a rehabilitation kennel in Flagstaff. Just for a while, he'd told himself. Just until the pain got smaller. That had been 8 years ago. He never went back. Camila stood beside him now, arms folded, voice low. "So you did know him?" "I let him go," Ben whispered, "because I couldn't deal with what he reminded me of." They both turned to look at the dog, now laying his head gently on Josie's quilt. Ranger didn't look at them. He was still watching her, still protecting. Camila walked over, knelt again, and placed her hand on his chest. "So you're not nameless after all," she said softly. "You're just waiting for someone to remember." Ranger blinked once. Slow, certain. Outside, the wind had begun to calm. Inside, a strange peace settled into the room, the kind that doesn't come from being untouched, but from surviving long enough to feel safe again. Ranger wasn't just a wounded stray. He was a dog with history, with memory, with loyalty that had never died, even when everything else had. Ben moved back to the hearth, eyes glassy. He sat down slowly, shoulders heavy beneath an invisible weight. "I should have gone back for him," he said. "You just did," Camila replied. And for the first time in years, Ben didn't argue. The knock on the door didn't sound threatening. It wasn't loud or aggressive, just sharp enough to cut through the calm of the cabin. But Ben Coulter knew before he even opened it that peace, for the time being, had ended. Outside stood two figures, a woman in a crisp navy jacket with a laminated badge clipped to the lapel, and beside her, a second woman with stiff blonde hair, too bright lipstick, and a scowl that seemed etched into her bones. Crystal, Josie's legal guardian. Technically. Ben stepped onto the porch, body tense but composed. "Can I help you?" he asked. The social worker introduced herself as Deirdre Kemp with Child Protective Services. She offered a neutral, professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We've received an inquiry regarding Josie Hart," she said. "This is her appointed guardian, Miss Crystal Monroe." Crystal didn't wait for permission. She brushed past Ben, her boots crunching across the porch. "I knew this would happen," she snapped. "Letting her ride that rural school bus. I told them she'd get lost in the system." Her voice was equal parts accusation and self-pity. Ben followed her inside, jaw clenched. She wasn't lost in the system. She was forgotten. Crystal huffed, dropping her purse onto the coffee table like she owned the place. Same thing. Josie sat on the couch, wrapped in one of Ben's old flannel shirts. Her eyes widened when she saw Crystal, and her hands instinctively reached for Ranger, who lay curled beside her feet. Crystal's voice softened, but only slightly. "There you are, sweetheart. You've caused a lot of trouble, you know that." Josie didn't answer. Ben stepped forward, voice low and steady. She's been safe here. She hasn't asked for you once. Crystal's fake sweetness snapped. That's none of your business. You're not her father. I'm the man who found her half frozen in the woods after you let her disappear, he said flatly. Deirdre raised a hand. Let's keep this civil. Crystal turned to the social worker. I want her back, and the state owes me for all the back pay. I haven't gotten a disability stipend for over a month. She's been marked non-disabled in the system ever since I updated her profile to avoid extra medical red tape, and I never changed it back. That's not fraud, it's efficiency. Camila, who had quietly entered from the back room, stopped mid-step. Wait, she said, eyes narrowing. You removed her medical designation so she wouldn't be flagged for needing accommodations? Crystal shrugged. It kept the paperwork cleaner, more straightforward. Ben stared at her, stunned. You deliberately erased the fact that she's paralyzed. I did what made the form go through faster, Crystal barked. And it meant more assistance per month. I'm the one feeding her. Well was. She's not a tax form, Camila said coldly. She's a child. Deirdre cleared her throat, uncomfortable. We'll need to open a full investigation into the care record. Crystal crossed her arms. Fine, but until that's done, she's coming with me. No, Josie said, voice quiet but firm. Crystal blinked. Excuse me? I said no, Josie repeated, louder this time. Crystal stepped forward. You don't get to make that decision. She does, Camila cut in, especially when the guardian in question altered her status to exploit the system. Deirdre looked between them, already overwhelmed. Let's calm down. Ben placed a hand protectively on Josie's shoulder. You're not taking her, not without a hearing. Crystal's voice sharpened. You're not even family. Ben looked her in the eye. That doesn't mean I care any less. Then came the second knock. This one harder, faster. It was an officer from Animal Control, a young man in a windbreaker and badge, flanked by another worker with a crate in hand. Ben's stomach dropped. What's this? We received a tip regarding a potentially aggressive dog at this address, the officer said. There's a service history tied to a dog named Ranger, including a red flag injury to an officer during duty. Camila stepped in, voice ice cold. You have got to be kidding me. It's protocol, the officer explained. Any flagged animal that's been involved in a bite incident even years ago requires evaluation. No, Josie said again, voice breaking. No, he didn't do anything wrong. Ranger stood up slowly, ears perked. He didn't growl, didn't flinch just, moved closer to Josie. I was there, Ben said. That flag, that was from a mission where Ranger protected a girl during a domestic call. The officer he bit was beating his own daughter. Ranger acted to protect her. There were witnesses, but the department buried it. That doesn't change the record, the officer replied. Camila stepped between them. You'll have to go through me. I'm his attending vet, and this is a therapeutic case under review. Removal without medical clearance is illegal. Josie turned to Deirdre, eyes full of tears. Please, don't let them take him. He's not dangerous. He's brave. People just couldn't see the difference. For a moment, no one spoke. Just the sound of Ranger's steady breathing and the soft hum of the wood stove. Deirdre finally sighed. No removal will take place today. I'm placing a temporary protective order on Josie pending a full investigation. She will stay here, under supervision. Crystal protested. You can't just. I can, Deirdre said sharply. And I will. The officers left, muttering something about returning if the status changed. Ranger didn't look at them once. Crystal stomped toward the door. This isn't over. You're right, Ben said, but it's finally heading in the right direction. When the door shut behind her, the cabin felt quieter, but heavier. Josie sank into the couch, burying her face in Ranger's neck. I thought they were going to take him. Ben sat beside her. They didn't. Camila placed her hand on Ranger's back. You didn't just rescue her in the snow, Ranger, she whispered. You saved her again today. And for the first time in hours, Josie smiled. Just barely. But it was enough. The wind screamed through the pine trees like an old ghost remembering something terrible. It was the kind of winter night that made even the animals hold their breath. Snow had blanketed the valley for hours, covering everything in a deceptive hush. But at the edge of town, where the road curved near the industrial district, a flicker of orange broke through the blue cold. Inside the Sedona County Animal Control Facility, it started with a smell-burnt plastic, faint and bitter. Then came the smoke, thin at first, curling like fingers beneath the door to the main kennel. An old circuit panel, corroded and long overdue for inspection, had sparked a fire that now spread with terrifying precision. The security camera caught it all. Sparks igniting a blanket in the back office, smoke rolling along the ceiling like a tide. The alarm system failed to trigger. No staff were on duty past 8 p.m. But there was one heartbeat that didn't panic. Ranger, locked in a kennel on the far wall. He smelled it first. His ears pricked. He stood up, calm but alert, and stared into the growing smoke. Around him, other dogs began to whimper. A high-pitched bark came from a pen, 2 cages, over 3 pups, and their frail mother, barely 6 weeks old. In the opposite corner, a senior dog with cataracts and trembling legs pressed against the bars, blind and terrified. Ranger didn't bark. He didn't panic. He moved. Somewhere deep in that well-trained mind, still scarred but not broken, a switch flipped. Not instinct, not fear. Purpose. He lowered his chest, braced against the kennel gate, and began to shove. It took several tries. He pawed at the latch, pressed his shoulder into the weakened lock again and again. His wound, though healing, tore slightly open. Blood hit the floor, but he didn't stop. The final push cracked the latch. The gate swung open with a metallic groan. Ranger ran. Not out the door. Not to freedom, but to the puppies first. The latch on their crate was lower, easier to nose open. One paw reached through, jiggling the metal. The camera showed it. Deliberate, slow, determined. The gate clicked. The mother staggered out, whining. Ranger nudged each of the pups until they followed. He turned, limped toward the next kennel. The blind dog. Smoke filled the corridor. Ranger reached the cage, nuzzled through the bars. When the old shepherd didn't respond, Ranger did something astonishing. He barked. Just once. Not loud, not frantic, but sharp, focused. The blind dog flinched, turned, and pressed toward the sound. Ranger pawed the gate again. This one was rusted. He clawed until it budged. He led the dog out, moving slowly enough to keep him near, and herded the group toward the back away from the worst of the fire, toward the exit with the push bar that the staff used during morning cleanings. And then, with all the weight in his body, Ranger jumped. The camera caught Itha's front paws, hitting the bar just enough to jar it open. The door gave way. Smoke poured into the parking lot as 6 animals stumbled into the snow. It wasn't until 10 minutes later that a neighbor spotted the smoke and called it in. By then, the fire had eaten half the building. Firefighters pulled in fast, hoses already uncoiled. But the moment that stayed with them, made every paper and headline was this. Ranger, limping, singed, covered in soot, standing beside the line of dogs like a general who'd just led his troops through a war zone. He didn't bark. He didn't move. He just stood guard. The video went viral within 12 hours. Someone from the department had reviewed the tape and uploaded it, and the internet did what it always did. It found the heart and ran with it. Headlines filled the screen. The dog who chose fire. Twice. Hero shepherd saves blind dog and puppies from blaze. Rescue dog. Rescues again. People remembered. People connected. Within days, the narrative around Ranger changed from flagged animal to living legend. Donations poured in for the other rescued dogs. Messages flooded the vet clinic. News vans parked outside Ben's cabin for interviews he refused to give. But there was one thing he did say to Camila and Josie as they sat around the fireplace a few days later. "We're taking this to court," he said simply. And they did. The hearing was held in the Sedona Municipal Courthouse, a modest brick building with buzzing lights and warped floor tiles. It didn't matter. The room was packed. Local reporters, volunteers, even the mayor showed up to sit in the back row. Camila took the stand first, recounting Ranger's rescue behavior, his healing progress, and his refusal to ever leave Josie's side. Ben followed, steady as always, explaining Ranger's past connection to Declan, his years in service, the reason for the old red flag. His voice cracked when he talked about giving Ranger up, and what it meant when the dog returned. Then it was Josie's turn. She wheeled to the front slowly, clutching a folded piece of paper. Her voice trembled, but she read anyway. "He's not just a dog. He's a second chance. He didn't have to stay with me that night in the snow, but he did. He didn't have to go back into fire again, but he did. People say he's lucky, but I think we're the lucky ones." The judge, a stern woman with silver-rimmed glasses, sat still for a long moment after Josie finished. Then she looked down at the paperwork and spoke. "This court sees no reason to maintain restriction on this animal. Ranger is hereby cleared of all behavioral flags and returned to civilian guardianship under Benjamin Coulter." Josie gasped. "And," the judge added, "the petition to establish legal guardianship of minor Josie Hart is granted, with a 6-month provisional period and regular review." Ben didn't say anything. He just looked at Josie, who was already crying. Camila leaned down beside Ranger and whispered, "You really are a damn miracle." But the biggest miracle hadn't even been spoken yet. After the hearing, as the crowd cleared, a woman in a gray sweater approached Camila. Her name was Ellen Fisher, a retired detective from Phoenix. She carried an old file, edges worn. "This may sound strange," she said, "but I worked a case over 15 years ago. A hostage situation. School shooting. One of the kids was saved by a K-9 unit. The handler was Declan Morse. The dog was Ranger." Camila went still. "I was that kid," she whispered. Her hands trembled as she looked at Ranger, older now, slower, but still watching her the same way he had through blood and smoke all those years ago. They stared at each other for a long, silent beat. And then Camila knelt and wrapped her arms around him, tears slipping freely. "You remembered," she whispered. "All this time, you remembered me." Ranger didn't bark, didn't move. But in that moment, it was as if he had said everything. The courthouse wasn't large. It sat tucked between a shuttered post office and a diner that still served coffee in cracked mugs. Its beige walls hummed with old fluorescent lights, and the floors creaked under every step like they remembered every case ever brought through its doors. For most people in town, it was just another old building. But to Josie Hart, Benjamin Coulter, and a German shepherd named Ranger, it was the place where everything might change. The hearing had been scheduled in response to 2 petitions, one for guardianship and one for the legal release of Ranger from all remaining behavioral restrictions. Both matters were bound together now, just like the people they involved. Josie sat in the front row, her wheelchair pulled close to the table. She wore her best hoodie, the one Camila had given her with the faded rescue emblem on the chest. Ranger lay at her side, head resting on one paw, body calm but alert. His fur, once matted and patchy, now gleamed faintly under the courtroom lights. Ben sat beside her, hands folded neatly on the table, posture straight. He wore a dark collared shirt that Camila insisted he iron. He hadn't worn anything that formal in years. Camila herself was there too, seated behind them, a quiet strength in her usual black coat. She wasn't one for spectacle, but this was important. The judge entered, an older man with thick glasses and a silver comb-over, his black robe heavy with years. He didn't smile, he didn't greet. He simply looked at the file before him and nodded once. "We're here today," he began, "to discuss 2 petitions involving the minor Josie Hart and a canine named Ranger. I've reviewed the initial filings, but I want to hear it from the people involved. Mr. Coulter?" Ben rose to his feet. His voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. It was gravelly, weathered, the voice of a man who'd seen things he couldn't forget and who finally decided to speak about them. "I served 30 years as a firefighter," he said. "I lost my daughter in a house fire I couldn't get to in time. After that, I left the city, left people. I didn't want reminders." He paused, eyes flicking toward Ranger. "My best friend from the service, Sergeant Declan Morse, passed from cancer. Left his service dog to meet this dog. Ranger. But I couldn't handle it then. I left him at a rehab center. That was a mistake. He looked directly at the judge. I never went back, until he came back to me. Ranger found his way to Josie, then to me. He saved us both. This time I won't leave. He sat down. The room was silent. The judge cleared his throat, then looked to Camila. Dr. Park, you've submitted documentation regarding the animal's health and behavior? Camila stood, her tone clinical but edged with something deeper. Yes, Your Honor. Ranger was previously flagged due to a bite incident. I've reviewed the archived reports. That incident was misclassified. Ranger acted to protect a child during a domestic disturbance. The person he bit was later convicted of abuse. Ranger's behavior was not aggression. It was instinct, loyalty. She paused. Last week, he led 5 animals out of a burning building. He opened their cages. He herded them to safety. I've treated hundreds of dogs. None have ever done what he did. The judge leaned back, fingers steepled. Noted. Then he turned to Josie. You requested to speak, he said gently. Josie nodded, her voice tight but clear. I wrote something. The judge gave a small nod. She unfolded a piece of notebook paper. Her hands trembled slightly, but she began to read. When they found me in the woods, I was freezing. I couldn't walk. My wheelchair was gone. I thought I was going to die out there. Then Ranger came. Her voice caught for a moment. She swallowed. He stayed with me when no one else did. He didn't know me, but he stayed. When my aunt came to take me back, he stood between us. When the animal control came, he didn't run. He just watched me. Like he was saying, if they take you, they take me too. And to ferment it. She looked up, eyes shining but firm. People talk about blood. They say it's what makes a family. But I think that's wrong. Blood makes relatives. Love makes home. The judge blinked behind his glasses. His lips pressed together. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then he cleared his throat softly and leaned forward. This court recognizes the extraordinary circumstances of this case, he said. Effective immediately, Benjamin Coulter is granted temporary guardianship of Josie Hart for a 6-month probationary period, subject to home review and social services oversight. Josie smiled, tears welling. Ben placed a hand on her shoulder. The judge continued, voice steady. Furthermore, the behavioral flag on Ranger is to be permanently lifted, based on documented heroism, veterinary recommendation, and observed emotional support behavior. He is to be enrolled in the Arizona State Therapy Dog Program. He looked down at Ranger and offered the faintest of smiles. Welcome back to service, son. Josie leaned down, cupped Ranger's face in her hands. You did it, she whispered. We did it. Ranger didn't bark. He didn't move, but his tail thumped once against the bench floor soft and sure. And that was enough. Spring arrived in quiet bursts, soft and hesitant. The snow receded from the edges of the pine trees, revealing wet earth and stubborn blades of green. In the mornings, light filtered through the windows of Ben's cabin in golden streaks, casting warmth on the wooden floorboards that creaked like old memories waking up from sleep. Inside that little house, a new kind of rhythm had taken hold. Josie had to schedule now therapy sessions twice a week, reading in the afternoons, and baking practice every Friday. She was learning how to knead dough with one good hand and one determined one, her apron always covered in flour, her wheelchair parked proudly near the oven. She made mistakes, laughed at them, and tried again. Camila had gifted her a battered old recipe journal, and Josie had already filled 4 pages with notes and little doodles of cookies and cupcakes. Ben, in turn, had started using a smartphone. It was a slow, reluctant process more than once. He'd growled at Siri like she was a malfunctioning engine, but Josie had infinite patience. She taught him how to take photos, how to send texts, and even how to check the weather without stepping onto the porch. And Ranger? Ranger had become more than just a guardian. He was now a teacher. Every weekend, Josie and Ben drove out to a nearby animal therapy ranch, where Josie volunteered with dogs who had suffered trauma just, like Ranger had. There, among wide-open fields and rust-colored hills, Ranger moved through the pens like an old general walking among new recruits. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply existed with calm dignity, and other dogs responded. Ones that used to flinch at every noise now followed him around the yard. He showed them how to trust, by doing nothing more than standing still. Josie had become his voice. Slow steps, she would tell the pups. Don't rush. Ranger says it's okay to take your time. The staff gave her a volunteer vest and stitched her name onto the pocket. But she still wore her rescue hoodie over it, faded, familiar, hers. And then, one morning, everything shifted. Ranger had always been steady. Even in pain, he had carried himself like something ancient and unbreakable. But on that particular Tuesday, as the sun reached over the hilltops, Josie noticed it. The way his gait had changed. More drag in the back leg. A slight hesitation before he stood. His breathing, a little shallower. Ben noticed too. That evening, as they sat on the porch wrapped in old quilts and surrounded by the scent of cinnamon from Josie's latest failed batch of muffins, Ben placed a hand on Ranger's side and whispered, "Easy, old man." "Hey." Ranger turned his head, rested it against Ben's knee, and sighed. "No pine, no panic, just tired." In the days that followed, Ranger moved slower. He took longer to eat. Sometimes he didn't finish his bowl, but his eyes never dimmed. They still followed Josie, especially when she practiced standing. She had reached a new milestone. With the help of braces and parallel bars installed in the backyard, she could now pull herself upright and stand just for a minute or two, but it was enough to feel taller than the trees. And every time she stood, Ranger was there, sitting just beside the bars, eyes locked on hers, tail brushing the ground like a metronome keeping time. That night, after her evening stretch and a lukewarm shower that smelled like eucalyptus, Josie wheeled herself onto the back porch. The stars were out, scattered across the dark like forgotten coins. Ben was asleep in his chair, a paperback open across his chest. Ranger lay stretched at the foot of the steps, chest rising and falling slowly. She wheeled beside him, then slid down onto the deck with the practiced ease of someone who'd grown strong in her arms. She leaned her head close to his and placed her hand gently on his fur. "I'm not afraid anymore," she whispered. "You taught me that. You carried the weight so I could walk again." Ranger didn't move, but he didn't need to. They sat like that for a long while, dog and girl, scar and scar, hope and hope. The next morning, Josie opened the little drawer in the hallway desk, the one where Ben kept important things, his late daughter's necklace, a folded flag from the firehouse, an old photograph of Ranger and Declan. From it, she pulled a red service sash. It had been stitched by Camilla herself. The words were simple, embroidered in thick white thread. "Service dog retired, still loyal." She clipped it onto Ranger's collar. Ben came into the room, coffee in one hand. He raised an eyebrow. "He's earned it," she said. Ben looked down at the old shepherd, now sleeping in the sunlight pooling on the rug. "Yes," he replied quietly. "He has." That weekend, they drove to the firehouse. The captain, an old friend of Benshad, heard the story. He invited them for a visit, just a quiet walkthrough, maybe a tour of the new engine room. But when they arrived, something unexpected waited. A wall had been cleared. A frame had been hung. Inside it, a photograph of Ben, Josie, and Ranger taken just days before, on the edge of the forest behind their cabin. Josie standing, one hand on Ranger's back. Ben beside her, his hand on both their shoulders. Beneath it, a small brass plaque. Ranger, protector, healer, hero. When others left, he stayed. Josie traced her fingers over the edge of the frame. They didn't speak. There was nothing more to say. Because in that moment, standing together beneath that photo, they all knew. They had named him Nameless. But now, finally, they called him something else. They called him Hope. Some stories end with applause, but the best ones end with quiet understanding. Ranger didn't just guard. Josie, he showed us what loyalty looks like when words run out. And Josie? She proved that family isn't built by blood, but by the hands that catch you when the world lets go. This video is more than a tally, it's a mirror, reflecting the resilience hidden in all of us. If this story moved you, please leave a comment, share your thoughts, and subscribe to Veil Marks. Your support helps us reach our first 1,000 subscribers, a small act that fuels many more meaningful stories to come. When you heal one soul, you heal the world a little. What part of this story stayed with you the most? Let us know below.